Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We'll let this folks continue to drift in. We're going to bar the doors soon, but people can still come in. This is, in fact, the Municipal-Agriculture Watershed Partnerships at Work, with 4 examples from Wisconsin. So hopefully you're at the right place. Okay, let's go ahead and get rolling. We want to try to be respectful of everyone's time. It is right at 1 o'clock, so I will call this meeting to order. Welcome, everyone. We are delighted to have you. As you come in and as we get started, we're going to launch a quick poll, and this is to help us decide which direction we're going. Did you watch all 3 of the videos? And it's okay if you did not. Just there won't be a test. Okay. Very good. That's probably enough. We can stop there. Okay. So welcome, everyone. Thank you for answering that question. That helps us decide which way we're going to go here. My name is Bartlett Durand. I'm the Director of Water Quality Partnerships here at the Sand County Foundation and with EPIC. We are going to be recording this webinar, and we'll put it on our website later if you want to come back and watch again. We will have a question and answer session for everyone at the end of the hour and 15-minute scheduled program, so please feel free to stick around for that. We're going to clip right along. So through this process, please use the Q&A box in the bottom to ask any questions you have. If we don't get to it today, I promise you we will get them all answered, and we're going to provide you with a report of this webinar that we'll send out to everyone who signed on within, call it 2 weeks of the webinar, basically as soon as I have time to compile everything and make sure we have the answers. Any presentations you see today, we will also provide, as well as the contact information of the professionals who are speaking today. So my name is Bartlett Durand. I'm with the Sand County Foundation. Sand County is the national nonprofit. We work at the intersection of agriculture and environmental improvement. We research and demonstrate conservation strategies that make economic sense for landowners. We advance conservation policy improvements, and our Leopold Conservation Award program recognizes and promotes the stories of conservation-minded farmers and ranchers to inspire other landowners. More than 50 years ago, Sand County Foundation was built on an idea advanced by Dr. Aldo Leopold, America's foremost conservation thinker. Leopold inspired private landowners to adopt what he called a land ethic, a moral responsibility to treat land, water, and wildlife with respect. Today, as most of the private land in the lower 48 states is managed by farmers, ranchers, and forest land owners, Sand County Foundation is inspiring a growing number of them to ethically manage the natural resources in their care. I'm also working with the Environmental Policy Innovation Center, also known as EPIC. EPIC is a startup nonprofit founded in 2017 and works on policy ideas that could deliver exceptional improvement in the speed and scale of conservation. Our work is focused on water infrastructure and equity, endangered species recovery, water quality partnerships, and private finance of conservation. One of our core values is empathy. People who live in the landscape where conservation occurs need to be listened to and respected as residents. Their ideas and values have often gotten too little respect. I want to thank our sponsor, Walton Family Foundation, that's really working in this entire upper Mississippi watershed, trying to bring a lot of different groups together to try to improve overall water quality. I want to thank the professionals here who have so generously given their time to this project, and to the farmers they work with. There's a lot of generalized discussion about the difficulty of communication and bridging gaps in our society, but I believe you'll find in these examples we're going today that open heart and open mind will bridge a lot of the initial suspicions And in general, you'll find that people do want to do the right thing. And so working with each other to find those pathways is critically important. We're going to have 4 presentations with 6 speakers. So again, put question and answers, your questions in the Q&A box, and we will answer them. My colleague, Craig Fisnick, is monitoring all the Q&As, and he will help feed me the questions to kind of process through. As you listen to these examples, I want you to listen to the 5 key points that we've identified for developing one of these projects. What is the core issue? What is the project area? Is there a watershed plan or a concept for what's happening coming out of the wastewater plant? The cultivation of direct partnerships and engaging a broader public into the concept. And then how do you actually get credit for the work you're doing? We're going to start with 2 projects, the Village of Albany and the City of Brodhead. These are both targeted, focused with a few farmer projects trying to reach through water quality trading permit compliance. Our first presenter is Tim Osfalk. He's a professional engineer with Mead and Hunt. He works with the Village of Albany on their watershed plant. Tim has over 30 years experience working as a consulting engineer. He's worked with the Village of Albany for 20 years to help them meet their wastewater treatment needs. For fun, Tim is a paddler and likes going throughout Wisconsin waterways, and he's a bike rider, and he calls it quiet country roads. My sense of quiet country roads is avoid the big trucks, but those of us who like cycling, there is probably no place better than biking around rural Wisconsin. Tim, I'm going to pass it over to you, and we'll show a brief clip of your video when you're ready for me to start that.
Great. Thank you, Bartlett. Great to be here today. Yeah, so the project that we worked on was a trading project with the Village of Albany's wastewater treatment plant to meet their phosphorus permit requirements, stabilization pond treatment plant, doing no phosphorus removal. So when they got their 0.1 milligram per liter phosphorus limit, it was a big change for them, and phosphorus trading was part of that solution. So if we want to run the clip now, that would be good.
Absolutely. Let me get to that.
I work for Mead and Hunt. We're a consulting engineering firm, and I'm currently working on a project with the Village of Albany here in Wisconsin. The Village of Albany is just over 1,000 people, and their little wastewater treatment plant for their village has never had phosphorus limits. But a couple of years ago, the DNR came out with new phosphorus limits that would apply to a small discharger like the Village of Albany. So they had to figure out how they were going to comply with these new phosphorus limits. The village has a very simple wastewater treatment plant. It's a 3-cell stabilization pond, very cost effective and simple to operate, but it does not remove anywhere near the phosphorus of their limit. So we wanted to look at the options involved with upgrading that treatment plant to meet the limit, partially upgrading the treatment plant to remove as much phosphorus as we could, and looking to trades outside of the treatment plant to meet the compliance with the limit. The first thing we did was a facilities plan, where you look at, here's the current wastewater loading and discharge, what it's going to be in the future, what the limit is, and then we developed alternatives where we upgraded the treatment plant to get all that phosphorus removed there. We looked at upgrading it part of the way to trade with sources outside, and then we looked at not upgrading the treatment plant and trading for all of it. And that analysis led us to believe that we could remove the majority of it by upgrading, doing a partial upgrade of the treatment plant, but to get the last 30% of it would become very expensive, and we decided to pursue trades to achieve compliance through that. Wisconsin DNR allows communities to make trades to offset the phosphorus that they discharge from their treatment plant over their discharge limit. The trades can be developed by any number of best management practices, and there's different trade ratios depending on where the trade is taking place and what kind of best management practice is being used to generate the credit. We are actively pursuing trades with area farmers. Our contacts have resulted in basically 3 different groupings of properties that we're looking at. One is right near the village boundary. It's a parcel that is currently in traditional field crop rotation, and we're looking at converting that to a perennial vegetation that would reduce soil erosion and reduce phosphorus. We're also working with the reamers on a number of properties here that again would be taken from conventional crop rotation to rotational grazing best management practice. And the third project is a conservancy organization that has purchased part of a golf course that has closed, and they're converting it from a golf course again to perennial vegetation. So 3 very unique opportunities, very different, all with the same end result of reducing the phosphorus discharge. Those 3 projects would offer more than enough credits for the village to meet their trading requirements. So, we've casted the net a little broader, so we have more than enough credits because things happen and you have to be prepared for meeting your permit compliance if one of those deals does not happen.
Our farm is called Reamer Family Farm after, my family. I'm the 3rd generation there, and our daughters are the 4th. We are a small, diverse livestock farm. So we do a lot of different meats and we sell them direct to consumer. And we also do cover crops and produce all of our own forages as well. We do have a creek running through one of our properties. It goes right into the Lower Sugar River. So I started to rent additional acreage, and that had a creek running through it that the city of Broadhead was doing a phosphorus reduction project on. And so I kind of came in the middle of that. It was already happening. And then I got to know the folks involved and understand what they were doing. And it looked like a win-win to me because they were, regrading the stream banks and fixing up the creek in a way that would only help us for however we wanted to use the land. And it also helps the village, city of Broadhead as well. And then with the cropland that we were renting, realized that maybe we could work with the village of Albany to do a land use contract, and because we plan on turning what is row crop ground into perennial cover. And so what we're doing is already reducing the phosphorus load coming into this creek. And so it seemed like a kind of a no-brainer to open up a dialogue about that.
So I am
All right. So Tim, just a couple questions quick before we turn it over to the next section and come back to you. Can you just talk about that permitting piece, how what you're doing on the land with Bryce Reamer and the Reamer Family Farm connects back to your permit? Make that piece for me on the trading.
Sure. The permit sets a concentration limit on the discharge of 0.1 milligram per liter. You multiply that by the flow of your discharge, and you have so many pounds of phosphorus you're allowed to discharge. And our approach to compliance is going to be reducing that phosphorus discharge, not all the way to 0.1, but close to it. And then the difference will be made up in these trades that are proposed, reviewed by the Department of Natural Resources, and would provide the credits for the difference between what we actually will be discharging versus what we're allowed to discharge. So that's kind of all called out in our 5-year WPDS permit.
Okay. Craig, did you want to have a clarification question real quick?
Just passing along a question, Tim. The question is asking about the partial upgrade at the Albany wastewater treatment plant and how effective was that for nutrient removal?
Yes, we feel is going to be very effective for them. Just adding chemical phosphorus precipitation will be a easy process for the treatment plant operators to operate and will not require the addition of filtration, which would be required to get down to the 0.1 milligram per liter. So again, it's got to be technically feasible and operator friendly, and with the staff that you're working with there.
That's great. Thank you, Tim. All right, we're going to come back to you with questions when we bring the other guys in. Right now, I'm going to bring in Andrew Skog and Andy Score. There you go, guys. Quickly, so we have Andrew Skog. He's a professional engineer from MSA. He is a graduate at the University of Wisconsin-Platteville. If you saw Bryce Reamer's sweater, he also had Platteville on it. So we're seeing this concentration from Platteville. Andrew's degree is in environmental engineering, and he's working now on a master's degree in biological systems engineering at UW-Madison. He is a licensed professional engineer with water resources and with an environmental emphasis. He's also a 10-year plus cancer survivor. And if that's not enough to wake up every morning happy, he gets to go walk out on his 160-acre sheep and goat farm in Lafayette County here in Wisconsin. With us also is Andy Score, who's a professional engineer with MSA. Both of these gentlemen work with the city of Broadhead on this project we're about to see. Andy comes from, guess where? University of Wisconsin-Platteville. Rather than getting a master's, he decided to get 2 bachelor's degrees, because why not? One in civil engineering and one in environmental engineering. He has a true passion with agriculture and working with farmers, and he proves it because he runs his own 160 laying hen operation. He sells his eggs directly, primarily through his home office at MSA. So welcome, gentlemen. You want to set up your project here, and then we'll kick over to the video.
Yeah, here, should I share my screen now, Bartlett?
Sure.
Yeah, so we just got a couple slides here I was gonna plan on sharing to kind of give you a sense of where we are in the state of Wisconsin, and a little bit of kind of the basic facts of how the project worked out for us. So let me make this bigger. So again, thanks for allowing us to present today about this project with the city of Broadhead. Just a little background. You have a map there with a star. The star is the location of the city of Broadhead, and the little inset map there is just the blue dot would indicate where their wastewater treatment facility is. A couple things I'd like to mention. Broadhead is a relatively small community, actually just downstream of Albany. In fact, we're a little bit larger, different type of wastewater treatment facility. In our case, the city actually has a fairly sophisticated mechanical treatment plant, and they are also subject to, or were subject to, a new phosphorus limit of 0.1 milligrams per liter, which the existing treatment facility was not expected to meet without a major tertiary phosphorus upgrade. And in their case, when we first started working with the city, their average effluent quality was about 0.8 milligrams per liter. We did some, I would say, minor optimization projects at the wastewater treatment facility. They have biological phosphorus removal, and chemical is added for kind of a final polishing step. And so we did just a little bit of biological phosphorus removal optimization, but most of the focus was on improving the chemical feed side of things. One of the interesting aspects, and we'll get into it a little bit here, but the city of Broadhead, I don't know if you can see my cursor or not, but we're basically at the very bottom. We're the last wastewater discharger in the Sugar River, which is this red basin here in southern Wisconsin that we're showing. And so when it came down to kind of this discussion of, are we going to do this wastewater facility plant upgrade, which at the time we expected our estimate for the capital cost was about 4.2 million. What it really came down to when we were talking about, treatment plant versus doing this project out in the watershed is because of the city's location, they only discharge, I think they account for less than 0.5% of the total amount of phosphorus load at the downstream portion of the Sugar River where they discharge. And so in the grand scheme of things, when we looked at, are we going to spend this $4.2 million at the wastewater treatment facility upgrade? We and by we, I mean, really the city felt that money would be spent better out doing environmental improvements in the watershed. And just some things of, why it worked out for the city. And I think you'll see this as a recurring theme with other participants today. But we just experienced huge cost savings compared to the wastewater treatment plant upgrade. We're looking at $3.3 million of capital cost savings, potentially annual savings on the tune of $50,000 a year. And for those of you that are into engineering, economics, present worth cost or life cycle cost of about $3.8 million. So just huge savings for a small community like this. And the other part of the story, which is really related to how this, I would say, water quality trading is, at least the way it works in the state of Wisconsin, is there's these trade ratios, or another word for them would be safety factors that are applied to the projects that you do. And so because of this safety factor or trade ratios, basically the amount of phosphorus that we would have removed at the treatment plant with that major upgrade gets multiplied. And so in our case, we're looking at potentially removing over 1,000 pounds of phosphorus per year from this area, and instead of 190 pounds, which is what we would have experienced with that $4.2 million upgrade. So not only are we, I think, saving a substantial amount of money, but we're also potentially doing more benefit to the environment. And so just a little background about where our projects are. We held several stakeholder meetings with different landowners, nonprofit groups, and we were all led to believe that one of the local sub-watersheds called Seals Creek was the place to focus our efforts. And one interesting part of the story is we met with a local landowner. He was a dairy farmer that came to some of our stakeholder meetings, and we decided we'd go meet him at his farm, and we started looking at different projects that he could do and realized, hey, you've already done all the things we would want you to do. And he's like, well, I know, but I want you to go meet all my neighbors. And just by chance, all the people that are involved in our project are almost directly contiguous to his farm. So we have 3 properties that we're working on. You can see on the map here, landowner A, landowner B, landowner C. And landowner A and B were stream bank stabilization habitat improvement projects, and they were about 1.25 miles in length in total. And then landowner C, which hopefully some of you have some questions for Andy Score later, is a major dairy farm improvement for a relatively small dairy farm locally there. So that's kind of where our projects are located and why we picked that area. And just a short project summary, again, we're looking at about 1,000 pounds of phosphorus removed per year. In terms of credits, we're potentially going to be generating 390 pounds of credit. And again, that's basically taking that trade ratio or safety factor. If you apply that to divide that from 1,090 pounds, you get that 390. And we're looking at a capital cost of about $900,000, annual cost of $42,000, and so life cycle cost right around $1.5 million. So pretty good project for the city of Broadhead to take on. So with that, I'll send it back to you.
Great. Let me go back to, all right, we're gonna watch a little bit of your video here, and then we'll have a time for all of you guys to have some questions here.
Consulting engineer, and I work for the city of Broadhead. This project is all based on new phosphorus regulations in the state of Wisconsin. Very stringent regulations came out around 2010. And for the city of Broadhead, that limit is a 0.1 milligram per liter limit, which is not the most stringent in the state of Wisconsin, but it's definitely more stringent than what they had, say, 5 years ago. I've been working on this project in terms of planning since around 2013. And part of the original, scope of work was looking at how are we going to meet this new phosphorus limit. And so we looked at a couple things. One, upgrading the wastewater treatment facility. I would say luckily for the city, they do have a relatively new and sophisticated treatment plant. And so they can actually get the phosphorus numbers quite low. And so the Watershed project in this case is substantially lower cost than the wastewater treatment plant project. The other, interesting aspect is where the city of Broadhead is and the Sugar River watershed as a whole. Broadhead is very much so at the bottom of the watershed. And so the amount of phosphorus load that they actually produce to the Sugar River is maybe only 0.5%, maybe less than that. Why would we spend $4.2 million to fix a 0.5% of a problem when we can do something that's less expensive and potentially reduce more phosphorus?
The Broadhead trading project really is made up of 3 types of projects. One is a facility or a structural project. The second one is a stream bank stabilization project. And the third one is more of a cropping practice. So with that, each one of them has pros and cons. And so when we improve facilities, they're fixed, they're permanent. We typically are controlling the environment in some fashion as well as the operation and maintenance. And so we have a fixed ability to account for a certain number of pounds of phosphorus. The way this plan is set up now today is we actually have more credits than what the permit said we have to have. So it creates a lot of flexibility for us. So if there's a year where we have some flooding, we maybe have some other environmental issues, we have enough credits per se in the bank that offset our ability to maintain compliance with the permit.
One of the interesting projects we worked on was improving a local dairy farm. And I would say the interesting aspect, or what we were able to provide to the project, was significant financial benefit to the landowner. And we did that really in 2 ways. One, the city of Broadhead, who is taking these credits from the landowner, we paid them financially, one for part of the construction, a percentage of the construction cost, and then we also paid basically a subsidized rate for technical assistance or engineering, which is, I would say, in a lot of cases when you're doing dairy farm projects, that can actually be one of the biggest hindrances, the cost for technical service. And so we were able to provide the construction and the technical service. And we also partnered this project through NRCS EQIP, which is a program that's available nationwide to help fund projects on farms. And basically, I think the way it would work out when this project's all said and done is the city paid a third, NRCS paid a third, and the landowner will likely pay close to a third of the total project cost.
That we are a century farm. We've been 100 years last year. I'm 3rd generation. My son's farming with me now, 4th generation, milking around 200 cows right now, running about 500 crop acres. Started probably about 5 years ago, got contacted by representatives from the city of Broadhead about doing a cost sharing project through the DNR, phosphorus trading credits. Years of work and legwork, we ended up going with them and doing the building we're standing in, and then 2.2 million gallon manure tank and other projects, clean water projects on the farm, and then converting over to no-till cropping systems. So we tore down 2 buildings and took out a small capacity manure pit and built this building, which converted into 64 free stalls, calving barn, holding area, and a sick pen, and then along with the manure storage. And then we did a lot of runoff projects with all the rest of the buildings to try to keep clean water separated. With our lagoon that we built, we should be able to apply manure once in the fall, maybe in the spring, kind of depending on where the weather lines up, and we can get operators in to do that. But then we should be able to do basically minimum tiller or no-till injection. So then, we won't have runoff. We will have control of nutrients. We should be getting a bigger benefit out of the nutrients that are in the manure.
I was brought in to help Rob and Jordan make some decisions about how do they want to improve their farmstead, how to become a better dairy. We looked at manure management, we looked at lot management, we looked at feed systems. And from there, we kind of create a short list and where are we going to optimize our phosphorus credits to help the city of Broadhead. So really, it's a full all-encompassing system. And I feel that's part of being successful with farmers is looking at them as an individual and prescribing a custom application that helps them improve, be sustainable, be environmentally friendly, manage land, be land stewards, and create that efficiency.
So it's pretty leery of it to begin with, but then as we progress through the project, looking at some of the options available to us, and then it actually dovetailed into what we were doing quite well with my son buying in and doing some expansion and updating. So it actually did fit into our program quite well. And at one point, there was a group of us here. We were the young ones in the neighborhood, and we're all turning 60. I mean, everybody's in a different place. I happened to be sitting here with a son that was graduating college and actually wanted to come back home. A lot of the other places here, I don't think anybody's got interest in sticking money in the updating dairy facilities.
All right. So there's so much in that. And so those, please go back, all you guys watching, go back, watch these videos. There's so much information in these things. I refuse to use the popular term of unpack it, but let's approach just a couple questions in the time we have. And I'm going to bring Tim, you can come back. I want to ask all you guys just in a few minutes, but Andy Score. So you said something that was really interesting to me, which is approaching as the whole farm. And there's this bit on manure management. So could you talk about the approach to the whole farm, why that's important, and then this bit with manure storage versus spreading?
Certainly. So to touch base on the whole system, really it has to be a win-win-win for everybody. And I think it's certainly come through, whether it's the City Albany project or the City of Broadhead project, but also it's the other trading partners that have to win out of this as well. And certainly Rob Reamer alluded to, his growth potential, his son coming back to the farm. But when you look at the whole farming system together, there's ways we can improve efficiency and operation and things of that nature, which really is the win for that operation to grow or to sustain itself at 200 milk cows right now. From a manure management perspective, certainly our focus here was the Reamer dairy farm had 4 open lots. And by talking through that holistic approach on how to create efficiencies and improve operation, I talked a little bit about just farmstead practices themselves, but that all directly relates to manure management and how we can convert that infrastructure to on agricultural lands, nutrient management practices to improve the whole system altogether.
So how do you, let me make sure I get that clarified. So you guys put a lot of money into rebuilding the dairy, but the benefit comes from daily or annual practices, the manure spreading and the no-till. How did you create a long-term relationship to make sure you're going to get those credits in, say, 5 years or 7 years?
Yeah, I'll jump in here, Bartlett. So the way our project is actually set up, obviously, part of water quality trading requires that there's a binding legal agreement between the landowners and the municipality that's getting the credits or the benefit from the project. And so in this case, our legal agreement covers essentially 2 projects. One is the farmstead work. And so we did generate some credits from improving, I would say, the outdoor lot management for this dairy farm. And then the second part of this was, like Andy alluded to, it's on the nutrient management side. And so the nutrient management plan, the way our agreement is set up is essentially it's an incentive payment to follow through with the plan. And so we have a 10-year agreement with the annual incentive payment, and it's kind of a use it or lose it kind of deal. So the plan has to be submitted, updated every year, and then there's going to be some future verification of those that we're following through with that.
So Tim, having watched the 2 videos, let me clarify, the Reamers, we have 2 different family farms, and they're all multi-generation down from I'm assuming the original Reamer. So the farms are very in close proximity, but different villages or city village come together. So Tim, with Bryce Reamer, who's doing the grazing, can you walk me through what it is you're seeing? Why is that such a big deal, going from row cropping to the type of grazing he's doing? Why was that a focus?
You know, as far as phosphorus credit generation by switching from row crops to rotational grazing, there's a lot less phosphorus coming off those farm fields. So the difference between the loss in the row crops and the rotational grazing is what generates the credits that the Village of Albany is buying.
Okay. So lots of questions are starting to stack up. We're going to have to come back to them, guys. I mean, there's so much here. It's wonderful. So please stick around. You can go off video, but we're going to come back after we get to the adaptive management. We'll have questions for all of you to jump in, but thank you for that. We're going to rotate over now to adaptive management. Now, what you're going to see here are two presentations on much larger groups. One is the City of Green Bay and their new wastewater program. And then we're going to have the City of Madison or the Madison metropolitan area and their Yahara Winds program. In a nutshell, the difference between water quality trading, where we just had a couple examples, and adaptive management. The trading, as you see, are these very direct links where you go through a model. I think in Wisconsin, we call it the SNAP Plus model, and you actually figure out what are the pounds of nitrogen or phosphorus being removed by these practices. It goes through a formula that's in regulatory format of what credit you get for these reductions based on the model, and then that gets applied directly against your permit. Adaptive management's a different beast. The municipality is taking responsibility essentially for the entire watershed in their area, but they get a much longer time to do it. And they're not modeling for direct permit compliance, but as part of proof that they're trying to make progress. And at the end of the day, they're kind of responsible for overall improvement in the watershed over 20 years. So we'll talk about this, and you'll see a very different flavor in how these programs work. First up is Jeff Smutty he's the Director of Environmental Programs with New Water, which is Green Bay's Municipal Sewerage District's program. Jeff has his bachelor's degree from UW, not Platteville, but Stevens Point. So we're a different part of the world now. I'm not sure I can quite handle this. His degree was in soil and waste resource management. He got his MBA from Lakeland College. He was in the operations division for over a decade before he became the watershed programs manager and now the director of environmental programs. He's an avid outdoorsman, hunter, and fisherman. And like Andy, he raises his own chickens, but instead of for eggs, he slaughters them. And he does about 50 a year and sells off half. So if anybody needs some pick up cash, he's happy to have someone come help him pluck and gut some chickens once a year. So I'll put you in touch. But welcome, Jeff. And you want to take us off and tell us about your program.
All right. Thank you, Bartlett. I will just get my screen shared here. And I'll be with you in a moment. All right. Hopefully you're seeing full screen.
You're in great shape.
Fantastic. Okay, we'll take it from there. Well, thanks for the introduction. As Bartlett mentioned, I'm Jeff Smutty from New Water, which is the brand of the Green Bay Metropolitan Sewerage District. We operate two treatment facilities, the Green Bay and De Pere facilities, which are in fairly close proximity to each other, but combined total treat 38 million gallons of wastewater each day from Northeast Wisconsin. We serve 15 municipal customers in a 285 square mile area. It's all about the permit, our WPDS permit. The permit we're operating under currently was issued in 2014. We are very close to the reissuance of a new permit right now. But that 2014 permit showed that there would be future more stringent phosphorus and total suspended solids limits. So the message is very clear between all of us what the driving force is. We found, looking at our treatment operation, that optimizing the best we could, we were still looking at facility improvements that would be somewhere north of $100 million net present value. So pretty large capital investment to try to meet those limits. We also looked at another alternative being adaptive management, addressing these reductions from a watershed perspective. So looking at plant optimization plus work in the watershed, our best estimate is about $38 million over our 4 permit terms of approximately 20 years would be the investment that we would have. Similar story to what you've heard earlier, we can have far greater reductions from the area with far less cost to our municipal customers. So just to give you perspective, we're located in Northeast Wisconsin in the Fox Wolf drainage basin, and more specifically the lower Fox, but all of it drains to Green Bay and then ultimately Lake Michigan. So over a 6,500 square mile area that all drains past New Water's Green Bay facility before it enters Green Bay. We had no experience working in the watershed, so we decided as we embarked on this mission, we should start with something small, and started with a pilot program, a pilot project in Silver Creek. So we worked in Silver Creek, the small sub watershed, about 4,800 acres, just outside of Green Bay. This is really an opportunity to kick the tires, give it a practice run, and learn a few things. What we did is inventoried all the agricultural acres in this area, proposed some suggested conservation practices to address the needs. And some of those best management practices that we eventually installed were more permanent practices like structural practices of grass waterways, critical area plantings, buffers or filter strips, wetland restoration, grazing, managed grazing operations. The list kind of goes on. In addition to those more permanent practices, we also worked with the growers quite often in these softer operational practices. So annual practices like cover crops, tillage and residue management. Many of our farmers actually completely moved to a no-till operation. And then also being in a dairy area, manure application is very important. So looking at low disturbance manure application, something that could work alongside no-till and cover crops and still allow them to apply those nutrients to their fields. So we tried to look at a systems approach and not just one-off projects. So this is just a really nice drone footage of one of the areas that we worked on. So you have a wascob complex upslope from a vegetated buffer area, a stream remeandering project that one of our partners completed. And then the field that's adjacent to it was in cover crops and no-till for almost 5 years continuously. So trying to package and look at the entire area as this systems approach was a really strong pull for us in our program. So that Silver Creek pilot project, which we kicked off in 2014, we focused our efforts on for about 5 to 6 years. And now we have begun evolving and growing into what we now call the new Watershed program, which is our larger adaptive management effort. And this effort is now for compliance of our WPDS permit. We have an approved adaptive management plan. As I mentioned before, our permit is in the reissuance stage right now, so we'll be on board real soon. The mission for this program is to foster our strategic partners and implement adaptive solutions to improve water quality in Ashwaubenon Creek and Dutchman Creek watersheds. So 2 adjacent sub-watersheds that are nestled right up next to Silver Creek in the Green Bay area that all flow into the lower Fox River. So some of the goals of this program are achieving these TMDL reduction targets, reducing about 19,000 pounds of phosphorus per year by the end of the program, about 4 million pounds of sediment, looking to improve water quality and also biological improvements in Ashwaubenon and Dutchman Creek and the lower Fox River, implementing best management practices to the maximum extent possible and practical and cost effectively. And then maintaining the partnerships that we've developed and then building new partnerships, not only with agricultural landowners and growers, but also municipalities, moving more into some urban focus and what we can do in those environments as well. So all of this looking out over 20 plus years of effort in this adaptive management approach. So I mentioned partners. This is just one slide, a quick snapshot of the partners that we have worked with in Silver Creek that we have now gained commitment from moving forward into this new watershed program in our adaptive management efforts. This list continues to grow. The most exciting part is once you demonstrate you get motivation and you've demonstrated progress, these partners just keep coming and have even more interest in working together with you. So the key with partnerships I always talk about, find where your goals align, and where those goals align, you can really do a lot of great things. And the more you look into these partners, the more opportunities there are. So a quick slide, just kind of hitting some of the key components of what I call adapting to adaptive management. Some of the major components is, looking at your agencies, your nonprofit organizations. You need to have these partners, NGOs, your landowners. The collaboration with those are absolutely critical. You need resources, of course. So having funding, commitment from, in our case, the wastewater treatment facility, some of your partners, grant funding to supplement, NRCS equip. There are so many different opportunities for funding, but looking at how those all coordinate together and align. Having resources for education and equipment. We did a lot of demonstration of trial equipment and even received a grant to purchase an interseeder to demonstrate a different way to plant cover crops. You have to think outside the box and what types of resources are needed in your watershed. Technical staff, boots on the ground. I'll say the most important part of a program like this. Having trusted, knowledgeable individuals out in the field, whether they're from the County Land Conservation Office, NRCS, local agronomy firms, if it's a local watershed effort, farmer-led watershed group, having those trusted technical staff out there, being able to speak to your program and to sell the good word. Think creatively. New Water actually funds a couple of positions in these categories to help serve the role of those boots on the ground for our efforts. A pilot area, having a small area, whether it's study plots, demonstration sites, a test watershed, start small. If you're beginning and you've never done this before, start small, show progress, let it grow from there. You'll see success. And then communication. We've done a lot of, and I wanted to throw some more slides in just short on time, a lot of outreach communication efforts. Program, sharing information from your program, the success, the failure, having meetings, bringing those folks together, fact sheets, newsletters, videos, whiteboard presentations, the list goes on, social media, all these different ways to keep people engaged and excited with your program. So now the least technical slide you'll see from me all day today, but I think this really speaks a lot. I've said this in most of my presentations. I believe when you work in a watershed, about 70% of your effort is social. It's building those collaborations, partnerships, building that trust with those landowners, with those growers you work with. You need to have that social aspect or the technical will just not work. I believe probably 20% of it is that technical aspect. You need to have the know-how, know how to engineer, design, and recommend the right practices. There's some administration, and like a lot of things in life, there's a little bit of luck too. But if you build on that social aspect, you'll definitely see success. So some of the key things reflecting back on our success from Silver Creek and now moving forward into our adaptive management efforts in Ashwaubenon and Dutchman Creek, I'd say there is no one size fits all approach. You have to tailor your approach to your area, your farming practices, your crop rotations, slope, soil type. You fit with what you want. So Northeast Wisconsin, Green Bay area, dominant dairy agriculture, heavy clay soils, low, flat, poorly drained, dominant hay, corn silage rotation. What works for us may not work for you, but if you take the major concepts, you'll definitely get it to work. Partnerships are absolutely essential. I've said it a few times. We've all said it. You need to be able to partner, work together. You can get a lot more accomplished. The boots on the ground, those trusted staff members from County Land Conservation, NRCS, the list goes on. They are the most important people to open the door to your program. Spend time building that trust and providing the technical resource and expertise they need. The conservation practices will fall into place. They will happen once you build that trust and that support. And my last piece of advice is it takes time to see a response in water quality. You have to be patient. Most research shows it takes 10 or 11 years or more to see that response in water quality from efforts like this. So you can't be impatient and expect to see results in the first year or two. There's a lot more I can share, but we'll wait for the Q&A. So with that, I will turn it back over to Bartlett.
Awesome. There you go. Thanks, Jeff. One quick question, and then we're going to jump over to Marty's group and then bring everybody back for questions. Some great questions coming in. Thank you for everybody watching. I promise if we don't get to it today, we will have follow-up Q&A that we'll send out to everyone. We want to answer everything. So the question I had with the partners, now when we saw Tim and Andy's and Andrew's presentation, they had 1 or 2 farmers they could work with because the scope. You're at a huge operation here. How is it you created partnerships with the farmers? And previewing, we're about to get to a partnership with a farmer group. Do you have a farmer group, or are you just out there finding them one at a time?
So we do not have a farmer group in our area. So we did this organically. So we started with a local agronomy firm who had a pretty good foothold on the area, was a trusted source. And there's also a large presence of county land conservation in the area. But the first person in the door talking to these farmers was that local agronomist that we worked with and we hired. So that agronomist was able to understand their operations and speak to what their needs were, and that whole custom, that tailored approach, working with them, slowly building that trust, bringing in land conservation, and eventually expanding that group a little broader to New Water's team. And by slowly building that trust, working focused efforts with each of the farmers in the area, we eventually built up what sort of seems like a farmer watershed group. It just doesn't have that formality.
Great. Thank you. We got a lot more we'll cover in future things as well. For now, let me introduce Martin Griffin. Marty is the Director of Ecosystem Services for the Madison Metropolitan Sewerage District, otherwise known as Yahara Winds. Marty's very focused on the we in water, although I can't make that pencil out. Like there's how we is in water, maybe spin it around, but he's big on humans in water. He got his graduate degree in biology, examining the impacts of excess nutrients on coastal ecosystems at Woods Hole out in Massachusetts. He's been working in this area for 20 years, looking at the holistic interaction between human land use and water quality. Dead on what we're doing here. He sees the increase in societal and regulatory pressure to produce cleaner water, increasing the tension, but he reminds everyone it costs more to clean the water after it's polluted than to prevent the pollution in the first place. So Marty's focus is always to work on trust and building partnerships, and that's the way you have to move at that speed of building relationships, building trust to get things done together. Marty, I am delighted to have you here, and take it over.
Thanks a lot, Bartlett, and thanks, Jeff. That was a good segue because I think there's a lot of parallels between what we're doing at the Madison Sewers District and what you're all doing up in New Water. So I'm really excited for the Q&A, but I'll just give a brief summary of the program we have going on at the Sewer District. And so just very briefly, we're a municipal sewer district, so we convey wastewater from a lot of different communities in the Madison metropolitan area. Last year was our 90th anniversary. We have about 26 customer communities, and that's about 360,000 people we serve. And so we utilize a series of miles of pipe. We have 18 pump stations, and that equates to about 40 million gallons of water per day coming through the treatment plant. We're governed by a 9-member commission, and those commissioners are appointed by our customer communities. So when we were faced with our phosphorus challenge, we decided to create a group called Yahara Winds, and that was specifically to meet our Clean Water Act requirements, which was meeting that phosphorus standard. And so this group started out as a pilot project in the watershed in about 2012, and then transitioned to the full Yahara River watershed in 2017. And so the reason why we had to create this group is because we do have a numeric phosphorus standard. You've heard this mentioned a few times already today, but that really was the driver for this project. And so the regulatory framework that created this type of situation necessitated us to think of ways to meet this requirement. This graph is showing how well we just do without adaptive management or anything, just our normal treatment processes. And so we really do remove, a good amount of phosphorus. It's a biological removal system we utilize. And to meet the statewide standard, it would be an additional, 70% reduction. So very expensive compliance costs if we're going to use treatment. And really, if you think about it, we could spend all that money on treatment and the water quality impact would be to one area, that direct receiving stream that we discharge to, which is Badfish Creek. So adaptive management really is an alternate way to look at it. It's a watershed approach, and so we can get point sources and non-point sources really working together. And you can see by this graph that, there's a lot of different percentages of contributions for each of these different sources when it comes to phosphorus to our water. And so, I talked about our treatment plant putting in treatment. We're really only going to be accounting for a small amount of the total phosphorus that the TMDL is identifying. So bringing together the group called Yahara Winds is a way really for us to take a collective holistic approach instead of a singular approach, and have a much better water quality into the future. So our particular project to do a watershed-wide project revolves around 23 different municipalities. And we entered into an intergovernmental agreement with those municipalities to help solidify the resources needed and also the commitments needed. Because you can see here, there's a large urban component to phosphorus as well in our area. We also entered into agreements with 3 counties. Our watershed spans 3 different counties: Dane County, Columbia County, and Rock County. And so those counties have land in the watershed, and we knew we needed to work with them because you can see there's a large component that is agricultural. And then we knew that we had to meet farmers where they were. We couldn't just use our county resources. And so we also have agreements with a watershed farming group called Yahara Pride Farms. And they're in the northern part of the watershed. And that is a lot of phosphorus that's coming from some of that farmland up there. And so having partnerships with those groups also helps us meet our goals. The other thing I'll say about our watershed is, as Jeff alluded to, you have to have a little bit of luck. Our watershed, we were pretty lucky. It's one of the most heavily studied watersheds in the world. We have the Yahara River goes through the chain of lakes that are pretty famous, but we also have a lot of urban area compared to cropland. It's about, a 30% urban area, and we have about 50% cropland. So we really do have opportunity with this mix of different sources to get at our goals. It's not like we had a watershed that was 100% farmland or something like that, where it becomes more difficult. So this is a similar type of graph or slide that Jeff showed, so I'm going to blaze through it. But the one thing I want to point to is those capital letters at the bottom, the creativity and innovation. And so, as Jeff already talked about, all these things are important to make it work, and they're all get this improved water quality. But all those things really lead to creativity and innovation, and I think you really need that to be successful. Through our project, we actually discovered that there was a source of phosphorus called legacy phosphorus that was already in the sediments of the rivers that feeding in the lakes. And so we were able to utilize projects that looked at this legacy phosphorus as well as those 3 buckets I showed on the previous slide. So we really were able to ensure that we were getting at all sources of phosphorus. And so this is just some of our reduction successes and some of our goals. So again, this is a permit-based compliance. And so we do have pound phosphorus goals that we have to meet every year. And so we're doing pretty good. The other thing I wanted to mention is why enter into this, and people already mentioned the cost factor, and it really is a cost thing that helps bring municipalities to the table and want to enter into this intergovernmental agreement. One example is the TMDL may say a municipality has to address their stormwater for total suspended solids as well as phosphorus. And so stormwater approaches could cost upwards of $800 a pound to actually solve. But when you look at the watershed as a whole and you can move some of those buckets around that I showed, you can actually decrease your cost per pound by 8 times. Maybe it's closer to maybe 100 pounds or less per pound. And that same holds true for wastewater. You know, we're a wastewater utility. And so if we sunk all of our money in their capital treatment costs, we're going to have to pass those sort of increases along to our ratepayers. And so instead of, you know, paying over $100 million for treatment costs, we can take that $100 million and spread it out over the 20-year cycle of the adaptive management and really decrease the amount of money that our ratepayers have to spend. So I'll end there and have plenty of time for questions. And I know I went pretty quickly, but hopefully we can get at with the questions. So thanks, Bartlett.
Absolutely. Thank you, Marty. Great. All right, I'm going to call an audible at this point. I've got teed up a mini part of the Yahara Pride Farm Group working with Marty. It's on our website. You guys all got sent the link. I cannot impress upon you enough. Go back and watch all 3 videos, especially after watching the presenters. There's so much information in them. We had a professional photographer come out and do these. We have a reporter who's doing the questions. I mean, it's really well done. I would like to take credit for it, but it was the team here and professionals who do this stuff, and it's phenomenal. And the detail that comes through in that. So it's on our website. You all got the link. Go back and watch them now. But we are going to get to enjoy now a much longer time of Q&A because we've got a lot of questions coming in. So there's a lot of excitement about this. What I'd like to do, so invite everybody back in of our presenters. I do want to introduce Erin Holton. Erin works also at New Water. She's the Watershed Programs Manager, so a little bit more boots on the ground. If you go to the New Water website, you'll actually see a video just about Erin. I think she's talking about water monitoring. Erin has her bachelor's from UW La Crosse, so we have a different UW representing now. With a concentration in environmental science. And then she got her master's at the University of Maine in aquatic sciences. She also was a researcher at the Water Institute before joining New Water. And like me, in 2020, she has a new member in her family. She got a sourdough culture she calls Stanley and has been enjoying cinnamon rolls and bread repeatedly. Erin, just so you know, my little guy is named Dave, and we have weekly hot tub parties. So for those who need sourdough cultures, we can get you Stanley or Dave. That'll be a side benefit of this. What I'd like to do, just to kick off before we come back to our Q&A, because I think we're going to start losing, we've got about 15 minutes for some people are going to start dropping out. But I'd like each of you to give me one punchline takeaway. You've heard the presentations, you've seen the videos, you know what you live. What's one thing you want to give advice to for the folks on this panel? Tim, let's start with you.
I'll say that the phosphorus trading can really be a triple win in our case. You know, it saved the municipality money on their wastewater treatment. It enabled the farmer to make changes they wanted to make. And it's good for the environment that we're removing much more phosphorus than would have been done if we just complied at the treatment plant.
That's great. Erin, let's jump to you.
Thanks, Bartlett. I think one key takeaway for me is never underestimate how much everyone in the watershed actually does care and want to learn more. I think it's been one happy reminder for me that a lot of people do care about these issues and are invested in trying to find a solution. So as you're, creating these new partnerships that we've all, can't say enough about and how important they are and valuable they are. Never count folks out. They want to know, they want to learn, they want to improve on what they're doing. So I think that's one key takeaway that I enjoy talking about.
That's great. Andrew Skog.
Yeah, I would say Tim took the words right out of my mouth, but when I think about these projects, I think you saw it through all the presentations today. There's a discussion about sustainability that I think is happening. And like Tim said, 3 things, people, planet, profit. I think that's what you're looking for in these types of projects. I won't say that there's not challenges in this type of work or that the way it's set up in Wisconsin is perfect. But I think there's going to be some big benefits, and you're going to, I think, see an explosion in these projects over the next 10 years.
Marty?
Key takeaway, I guess, to be the trusted messenger. You know, we have this great flexible framework that our regulatory agencies put in place, but it's really up to, you know, places like us to actually utilize that to meet our permit requirements. And it's really hard for myself coming from a wastewater treatment plant to go out to a farmer and say, hey, why don't you do this? And we already heard earlier today about how it needs to be individualized and fit with specific farmers' programs. And so having a trusted messenger who can go out there and help form some of those partnerships that are non-traditional, I think is really important. And we got really lucky. We had Yahar Pride Farms as our trusted messenger, as well as the county. So that's what I would say.
That's great. Andy?
Similarly, thank you, Bartlett. Contingency. I think, you know, it's been well said here. It's not only about the budget, the people and the resources, but, you know, they're very multifaceted, complex projects, and well planned, well thought out contingency is quite key through these projects.
What what do you mean by contingency for the permit compliance?
That would be one really good example, but also just with the project scopes themselves. You know, the unknowns, you know, sometimes particularly in the agricultural farm side of adaptive management, we have to fit a project within a daily operation. And so sometimes we have to flex a little bit. Sometimes there's the unaccounted for things or the weather storm that prevented us from finishing up the manure lagoon, things of that nature. So good, well thought out contingency, you know, very, very similar to the comments from Jeff and Marty with being creative and adaptable.
Great. And Jeff, you had about 8 on your slide, but what's your punchline?
Sure, I'll throw one more. I mean, we talked a lot about how critical it is to build trusting relationships with farmers and landowners, but I think probably the most important salesperson you can have is a very pleased farmer, because those farmers talk to their neighbors look at what they're doing, they'll demonstrate what they're doing, and they will sell it for you way better than you can yourself. So that's where I talk about this social aspect, building that social component and having that trusted farmer who can then be your spokesperson can just make it so much more effective. And that's one of the big successes we've had.
In fact, I think in a conversation we had, you talked about when you were starting, you would beg farmers, use any tool you could to try to get them to sign on. And this year you're oversubscribed.
That's correct. In our new effort right now, we have far more interest than we have budget. So it's a great problem to have. And that's why we are seeking all the forms of funding we can to accomplish what we want. But definitely we are oversubscribed right now.
That's great. That's great. I see we have a whole bunch of questions. So Craig, can I turn it over to you to start asking questions?
Sure, and I'm going to bundle the questions a little bit, but we had a few tied to how we're measuring the phosphorus reductions and particularly modeling. And Bartlett mentioned SNAP Plus, which is a go-to program exclusively designed for Wisconsin here. I know that's used both in trading and adaptive management. So can at least someone from each of those 2 examples explain how you're using the modeling, and is it counting for total phosphorus? Does it include particulate and dissolved phosphorus?
Let's go with Tim. I think Tim was focused on the modeling early on.
Yeah, you know, I am not a modeling expert, so I'll start with that caveat. But you know, my understanding it is total phosphorus that is modeled, and again, so I think, you know, SNAP Plus is used for the modeling. There's not monitoring done out in the field as far as runoff calculations and stuff.
Andrew, are you the modeler for your group?
I am, and so I guess we use a combination of models, since we have kind of, I would say, 3 different projects or practices that we put in place. But obviously on the crop field side in Wisconsin, yeah, SNAP Plus is kind of the go-to. For the barnyard modeling, I would say there's really 2 models, in my opinion, that really fit the bill. One is Barney, which has been around for a long time, and the other is Apple Lots, which is a model recently put out by USDA. For our specific case, we relied on the results from Barney for our credit calculations, but we also ran Apple Lots too as kind of a verification step. And then the last part for the stream bank projects we did, that is, I think it's probably loosely a model. It's really, it's known as like NRCS regression equation. It's really a simplified version of determining soil loss. And if you apply some soil testing, phosphorus soil testing, you're looking at phosphorus loss. And yeah, so I echo too, really we're looking at total phosphorus like Tim said, but for example, SNAP Plus, it does account for, I think, soluble and non-soluble phosphorus in the model. So,
okay. So could someone follow up with me? Maybe Aaron, if you can. If you can't, we'll pitch it to Marty. On the in adaptive management, you still have to report what you're doing in the short term. And so do you use SNAP Plus for that? And how does that work in ratios and adaptive management? How does that whole thing work for you?
Yes, I will use the same caveat as Tim that I am not our modeler. And yes, you are correct. So annually, we will be supplying, the practices that we were able to implement, as well as the modeled reductions associated with those BMPs. And so similar to others, we utilize SNAP. We also will be utilizing STEPL. So there are several different options for that modeling, depending on whether it's an operational, more in-field type practice or whether it's a structural constructed practice in the field. Kind of depends on which model is best suited for that reduction calculation. So we'll utilize those modeled reductions, and that will be what we're actively reporting to DNR for total phosphorus and total suspended solids, in our case in Green Bay. And then that's what we'll be evaluating with each permit renewal. At the same time, we're also sharing water quality concentration values as well as flow measurements to look at how the concentrations with in-stream water quality are responding to those modeled reductions from the in-field practices. We are learning a lot of different components to the modeling I should kind of provide. We definitely do not have enough time to get into all of that, but trying to really understand the inputs into these models to really get the best real life calculation for the reductions for each practice is very important. And I have learned way more than I thought I ever would on some of these, just the ins and outs of some of these models and what the inputs really can be. And it changes how you look at the practices, and it changes how you decide on what practices to implement. So it's a windy road.
Yeah, I want to do a quick follow-up, Marty, with you. You mentioned that the legacy phosphorus issue and that you almost created a fourth bucket for sources of phosphorus. And one of the big debates I hear out in the Midwest, at least, is this tension between monitoring and modeling, and the frustration that at the end of a pipe of a wastewater treatment plant, you can monitor, know exactly what the reduction is, but monitoring in the stream, it's all over the map. And you're trying to get credit through a model, but the monitoring you're doing simultaneously may not show what the model is doing because you're in a different environmental frame. Can you talk about that tension and how that works within your project?
Yeah, wow, great question. So there's no question about it. Our permit requirement has to meet the statewide water quality standard, and that's an in-stream concentration. We use modeling to help us figure out what we think the in-stream concentration should be based upon all the good work we're doing up on the landscape. But at the end of the day, the monitoring needs to pan out. And so for our particular project, we made sure that what you just described, the fact that there's delays, we have climate change, we have this, we have different challenges that make that in-stream number maybe hard to reach. And so we, with our particular permit and our particular adaptive management project for the sewer district, we did enter into an MOU with DNR explaining these particular situations and saying, look, we have our modeled targets. We will submit modeling information. We have our in-stream monitoring for water quality. We will try to hit those targets. But at the end of those 20 years, it's not, at the end of those 20 years, if we can show that what we did on the landscape should have resulted in an in-stream concentration change, and the concentration really didn't hit the target, you know, we have the ability to utilize these other factors like climate change to explain why, and then move forward with how to rectify that. So I guess that's all I'll say on that tension. It's going to always be there, but I think it's something that Jeff mentioned, which is important, is that these are 20-year projects, at least for adaptive management. And so you may not see a response for 10 years. And so, you know, making sure that the projects you're putting in the landscape are robust enough to withstand some of these other challenges is really our best bet. And we have to, you know, nature's going to do its thing. And so as long as we put ourselves in the best position to reach those goals, that's all we really can ask.
That's great. Thank you. Craig, I'll kick it back to you for the next best question.
Great. Well,
another awesome question. We'll leave it at that.
Marty, you just answered the question that had been asked about what if things don't come out as planned with adaptive management. I'm going to go back. There was a question way up front about what if trades have any of the trading examples fallen through, or are they continuing over time? And then do you pay for them all up front? I know, Andrew, you mentioned annual payments in one case. Do you pay for some of that up front, or is it all ongoing annual payments for the trades?
Yeah, I'll touch on this just a little bit because it could be a little complicated for, I think, each partner that's involved. But the way it worked in our project, and we've kind of taken this approach in some other projects that we've worked on, is really, let's just say the improvements are like maybe stream bank related or something that really doesn't affect the farm or a business. We've really taken the stance that in those cases, it might be best to just pay for all the costs for that certain project. And so our two stream bank landowners, they didn't incur any costs through this project, whether it was technical services, permitting, or construction. It was all funded directly by the city of Broadhead. It was a little bit different for the dairy farm project we worked on, but essentially, and we talked about it a little bit in the video, but there was a upfront payment or reimbursement for some of the construction that was completed, as well as technical services. And then later we're going into this more incentive-based scheme of payment.
Tim, you want to jump in on that question?
Sure. In the trades that the Village of Albany's done, we paid some of the capital improvement costs up front, but we have annual credit payments worked into the term of the agreement, which is 20 years. And I know one question was, you know, have we proceeded with all three of these property owners and trades? And the answer is no. We've moved forward with one group of the trades that's going to give us the number of credits that we need. So the other two we have not gone forward with.
Can you, I guess in your situation, maybe the cleanest, are you paying for the practice, or are you paying for performance, or does it not matter because it kind of blends out or blurs out at the end of the day?
It's kind of a blend, frankly. We did pay for some capital costs up front that were needed to make the change in land use, but then we're also paying per pound of credit being generated. So that's kind of a performance-based payment.
Okay. Craig, back to you.
Yeah, I'm tempted to pose more real specific questions, but I'm going to back out a bit and ask a question. It was asked, how much are these ag and municipal partnerships part of a conversation that engineering firms or municipalities are having with each other? How much more is this being applied beyond these examples we're talking about today?
Let's see. Well, Andrew, I'm going to start with, or Andy Squire, I'm going to start with you because you're in the ag world a little more. Are you getting pulled into more and more of these projects?
Yes. Typically, in our situation is a little bit different because, I work with Andrew, being that Andrew and the wastewater program are kind of like the principal or the direct consultant to a lot of these municipalities. I'm brought in as a secondary or a sub just because of my interest within the agricultural infrastructure itself. But yes, I mean, all across the Midwest region, pulled into lots of discussions and lots of projects that are dealing with water quality trading.
Now, Andrew, you're in Dubuque, I think, right? Or at least your office is in Dubuque.
Yep, I'm in Dubuque now.
And I know we got that MOU going, so we're starting this concept in Iowa now. And I think Adam Schneiders is on watching this too. So hi, Adam. So we got 4 cities now, and Dubuque was the kickoff. So are you seeing this opening up in this concept opening up in Iowa too?
I would say from my perspective, I haven't, but that's just because I have several clients that are mostly Wisconsin centric at the moment. But yeah, I think part of the plan is to, take this where it takes us, and certainly it's going to take us to other states eventually.
Mm-hmm. And then Tim, you're our remaining engineer here, Mead and Hunt, sizable firm. Are you guys having this discussion throughout the Midwest?
Yeah, I think there's a growing and broader interest in trading as a solution to these things. Yes.
I will add, I attended a Wisconsin, I can't remember what it's called, Society for Engineers, Wastewater Engineers. They had a presentation on wastewater plants that was completely disconnected from the farmer groups, but they were just focused on basically their own green infrastructure, if you will. And so they're becoming aware of the expense of plant and mechanical inputs versus what they can do, like with the wastewater stream or the inflows coming in, or even the drainage ditch next door. So certainly green infrastructure is becoming a very common topic. I think it's these partnerships is the one that people are a little leery of, but it's certainly being discussed more and trying to figure out how we get there. Craig, back to you.
Yeah, I'm going to build off that question a little bit. Here's one. What role are bigger companies, and particularly the multinational agricultural companies, what role do they have in contributing to the success of whether it's a trading or adaptive management, or could they have?
Jeff, you guys are pretty industrial up there, right? Isn't that a big part of your issue?
We are, and that's one avenue that we haven't been able to grow, a lot in yet. But I think there are opportunities if we're talking national agricultural industries. I think there are definitely opportunities there that we just haven't expanded our efforts to or reached out. How you can find common, I talked before about those common goals and where you align and how you can partner. I don't have a perfect example, but I see there could be opportunities for it. And then
Marty?
maybe I'll throw it over to Erin if she has more thoughts.
Yeah, I was just going to mention one component that I think will be a key for a lot of these watershed efforts to be sustainable long term would be trying to kind of close the economic loop and trying to create economic incentives within the kind of ag industry. And so that still is kind of an unknown, but it's something that is very much realized in the community as a need. And so trying to figure out how to make those connections to really incentivize it throughout that entire kind of loop is going to be really vital to keeping things moving forward and the sustainability of these practices. I would say, Bartlett, to your point, we are working with large CAFOs. So those are large. We're very high in dairy in Northeast Wisconsin. So manure management is huge for up here, but we are working with CAFOs and small farms alike.
And Marty?
I would just add that at least in our area, in the Madison area, we do have a lot of corporate interest, and that's because, everyone wants to protect the water quality for the lakes. That's a gem of the area. And so we do have some opportunity where businesses want to contribute resources toward the effort. For instance, we do have a partner in Madison Gas and Electric They contribute resources to help this. And the other thing we're actually looking into the future is along the lines of what Jeff was saying, which is find out what the interests are of the potential corporate sponsors. Right now, carbon trading and carbon market is very huge, and it just happens. Everything that sequesters carbon is also great for holding back nutrients. Who would have guessed, right? And so maybe there's opportunities with boards that have specific corporate goals of saying, we're going to reach this sustainability factor by this year. Well, how can they do that? Maybe they can then come into Yahara Winds, for instance, and help provide resources, and we can help reach their corporate goals. So that's something we're looking into for the future. And so I think that is a great opportunity for these types of projects.
So this is big in Iowa. There is a group, the Outcomes Fund is the parent group that is funding both water quality and greenhouse gas sequestration through ag practices, like Marty was suggesting. And it's a way to bring economics from corporations into the farming to help layer in the benefit. And it's different modeling programs, but they each get separate credits. One key difference with greenhouse gas emissions, that's a national or international issue, and those credits translate based on those programs, where water quality is inherently localized. And Marty, we were working with Yahara Pride and Jeff Endres there on, can we do, just like with our water quality, can we create local businesses looking for carbon offsets to work in their own backyard? And we're starting to see that pop up. There's a project going on in Illinois where we're looking at that as well. So I think you're onto something, that maybe not water quality per se, but environmental outcomes, whether it's habitat restoration or carbon, is definitely something I think we're going to see chew into this a little more. Great discussion, guys. Thank you. Craig, I think we got one more we can bring in.
All right, I'll get back into the details, specifically to trading and trading ratios. How are those calculated? Do you agree with them? I mean, I guess this is for the consulting engineers with Albany and Broadhead. And, you know, how do you get the best ratio you can? How much flexibility do you have?
Andy, let me start with you before I let Andrew and Tim jump in that. We had an interesting discussion, it's in the video, about how you had your list of practices that could provide credit versus what the farmer needed. And I think that ties in where you're finding that balance. You just want to talk about that briefly?
Sure, absolutely. You know, so we developed our list of practices with the conversations with the farmer, and then Andrew and I sit down and we figure out, based on what Andrew's doing for modeling and the agreements, to determine what is the most effective way to spend the money per se. And so that really is what helps with kind of maximizing the time and the credits to get pounds of phosphorus.
Yeah, I think just a very generic answer to the question, I would say non-point to point source trade. So this would be like a farm or a rural landowner to a wastewater treatment plant type of trade like we're talking about today. You're generally going to see trade ratios in the range of 1.2 to 1 to maybe 3 to 4 to 1. And so the projects that have inherently less risk involved, I would say, like especially if perennial vegetation is involved, you're going to see those lower trade ratios approaching 1. And I would say in our case, there was some challenges that led our trade ratios in Broadhead to probably be a little higher than we would have initially anticipated. But we were at 2.8, and you know, do we agree with those? I think so. I mean, I can't say that anyone on the call, maybe you were privy to the discussions that set those trade ratios, but you got to start somewhere. And I guess I have to hope that the folks at DNR and maybe US EPA did their due diligence to figure out what those are.
Now, Tim, you just went through this, right? Didn't you just have a series of negotiations with DNR on the trade ratio? Is it a negotiation with them?
They have guidance that lays out their methodology pretty clearly. And again, I think the one factor that hasn't been discussed is, where the best management practice is located in the watershed relative to the wastewater treatment plant discharge. So again, for the Village of Albany, we looked at projects that would be close to the point of discharge to the treatment plant. So you get your best trade ratio. And again, we went with the perennial vegetation options that also provided that best trade ratio, was how we ended up moving forward with our trades.
Yeah, yet another spreadsheet to play with, right? Just, how you maximize these things. All right, we're gonna have to wrap up on the Q&A. Thank you, everyone. Panelists, you're fantastic. We could be here all day and not even scratch the surface of your knowledge. Really appreciate your time on that. All the folks watching, before you jump off, give me 1 minute. Please send me, find us on LinkedIn, Sand County, Bartlett Durand, any of the folks on the panel. We'd really, really like to stay in touch, like to have conversations, like to share information. We are here to help you. At least I am here to help you, and my team is. And our panelists are here are just awesome. And they're so giving you their time, and they are the front runners in this whole movement. And I can't thank them enough for what they've done. I'm going to leave you with 2 quotes from Dr. Leopold, just to kind of end on a strong note. Dr. Leopold said, "There are 2 things that interest me: the relation of people to each other and the relation of people to the land." And I think in this world, you hear that time and again. It's the people and that interaction with the water and the land that is the key driver of all this work. And then this one is a little more pressing, maybe. This is a straight quote from the Sand County Almanac. "We abuse land because we regard it as a commodity belonging to us, when instead we see land as a community to which we belong. We may begin to use it with love and respect." And for me, that really captures this watershed approach and takes it out of the realm of just a commodity we're counting into something that is life-sustaining and that we all have to work on together. So with that, I thank you very much for attending. Thank you again to our panelists, and please reach out at any time. And we will be sending a follow-up with the questions and answers and links to all these great panelists and presentations. Thank you all.